Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever part of the world you're joining us from. We're really pleased to have you here. And welcome to our webinar on understanding and implementing nature positive tourism. My name is John Sutherland. I'm the Senior Director of Community Impact at Tourism Cares. And today I'm joined on the webinar by some old and new friends. First, we'll start with the old friends, Daniel Turner and Helen Usher from a partner to Tourism Cares called ANIMONDIAL, which are subject matter experts on how the travel industry interacts with and has an impact on nature, biodiversity, animal welfare, those sorts of things. I've known Helen and Daniel for years. I worked with them in a previous role as the Director of Corporate Responsibility at Colette. They helped us there with our animal welfare policy and auditing all of our suppliers. So I'm personally really thrilled to be partnering with them on this webinar. And then a little bit later in the call, we'll have a couple other people join us who are from two examples of suppliers that are in the travel and tourism value chain that offer nature positive experiences. These two speakers will hop on the call, introduce their organizations, and tell you about basically the awesome work that they're doing. So we'll have Joe Imhoff, the program manager for the Skyline Conservation Initiative, which is on Maui in Hawaii. And this organization was part of our Meaningful Travel FAM, which took place in December on Maui and was hosted by the Hawaii Visitor Convention Bureau. I participated in that and just got an update from Joe on some of the saplings that we planted, and he'll tell you more about that project in a little bit. And then we're also joined by Katie Hall, the Education Field Associate from the Coral Restoration Foundation, which was involved in a volunteer day actually that we had for a program called Tourism Cares for South Florida back in 2018. So we're really thrilled to have these two partners on the call today. But as you'll see later, these are just two of many examples of how you can partner with fantastic organizations all around the world that are helping to conserve and promote nature and biodiversity while still giving guests phenomenal experiences. In a couple minutes, I'm going to hand it off to Daniel and Helen to run the webinar for a full hour. And actually, they've offered, because we have a lot of content today, Helen and Daniel have offered to stay on for an extra 15 minutes. So we'll go for about 75 minutes just to make sure all your questions are answered. But in the meantime, we certainly encourage you to engage in the chat. I've got a few colleagues from Tourism Cares in there who can help you out, support you, offer helpful links and context. And then please use the Q&A function, and Helen and Daniel will either get to those during the webinar today or at the end in those last 15 minutes. Before we move on, though, I'd like to just introduce Tourism Cares briefly. If you could advance the slide, please. For about 20 years, Tourism Cares has been dedicated to ensuring that the travel industry is used as a force for good. We're guided in all the work that we do on our programs, in person, online, in our webinars, by our mission, which is unite the travel industry and serve as a catalyst for positive social, environmental, and economic impact for the people and places of travel. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in the US, and we support travel and tourism companies who are members of our organization, both large and small, by providing resources, education, programming, and basically just trying to empower them and activate them to advance their sustainability journeys. Like we're doing today, we facilitate connections between the trade and tourism communities and try to inspire our members to create those meaningful connections with local change makers on the ground. If you could advance the slide by 2, actually, I skipped one, that's okay. One of the main resources today that we'll be talking about kind of in the background of the program here is our Tourism Cares Meaningful Travel Map, which is a B2B tool that helps the travel trade and sustainably minded travelers to easily source organizations that are making this positive social and environmental impact on destinations like we've been talking about. This is an interactive map that connects you on this call, the travel professionals, with sustainable community-led enterprises, products, services, accommodations, tours, all the things that you need to build a great program and help you meet that growing consumer demand for sustainable travel. So all 6 of the organizations that we'll reference by name today are on our Meaningful Travel map as what we call impact partners. And you can learn about them and over 425 or so organizations from all over the world that are on our Meaningful map by going and checking it out. So with that, I thank everybody for being here, and I will hand it over to Helen and Daniel to get the webinar really kicked off. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Just on behalf of Helen and myself and ANIMONDIAL, just a thank you to Tourism Cares and John in particular for hosting us today. It's long-term and great partnership, and we really value that. From our perspective, we're a specialist consultancy. We support travel and tourism businesses to help them improve their animal welfare, halt biodiversity loss, and ensure nature's recovery. And I think, certainly over the 25 years I've been working with the travel sector, we've been on the forefront of thought leadership, taking these fairly complex topics and making them accessible and applicable to travel and tourism. So we're going to be talking today about the nature positive tourism approach, but all of those other things you see listed there as far as animal welfare and preventing illegal wildlife trade, for example, are all intertwined with this whole nature positive tourism approach. So that's about us. But I want to just start today to talk about something that hopefully you're all familiar with, the Sustainable Development Goals. And normally these are displayed in series, and different businesses almost sort of treat them like a pick and mix and decide which elements, which goals they're going to focus on as their priorities. But I wanted to show you this diagram from the Stockholm Resilience Centre, which for me presents the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and recognizes the dependencies and trade-offs between the different goals. Together, they ensure that everyone has a better future and sort of more resilience going forward. But presented like this, you can really understand the priorities to keep those sustainability goals going and obviously being achieved. So along the bottom, along the basis of the diagram, you have the 4 goals that are relevant to ensuring a healthy and fully functioning ecosystem. And I'll come on to what an ecosystem is in just a moment, but that encompasses the abundance of water, climate change or climate regulation, and then biodiversity, all living things, both in water, aquatic, and on land or terrestrial. Above that, you have the goals that are associated with society, and together they ensure that everyone is in good health and well-being, and you need all of those to ensure ultimately that outcome. And then above that, you have the goals that are associated with a thriving and sustainable productive economy. And ultimately what the diagram shows very clearly is that you need to have that healthy, fully functioning ecosystem or nature along the bottom in order to have that healthy, thriving society and economy. And that demonstrates really, this is your key take home for today, is that sustainability will never be achieved unless you ensure that nature is at the heart of it. So let's just look at that lower level, the nature related goals. So you've got climate regulation, clean water, and biodiversity in water and on land. Without going into too much detail, because we just don't have the time today, it's important to note that these 3 elements are all interrelated. You can't remove one or only focus on one. For example, you can't just focus on climate change action without focusing on those other 2 elements. So you have to look at it as a complete picture. Why? Because these elements together ensure that nature is functioning, and that it ensures that the ecosystems within nature are actually working to their best capacity. So this slide shows some ecosystems are the interaction between biodiversity and those physical elements, and those create a number of services or outputs which we as humans, but all animals rely on. And those include raw materials such as food and water and other natural resources like timber and so on. There's the regulatory actions like cleaning air or pollinating plants and carbon storage and a whole host of other things. There's the supporting elements such as photosynthesis, converting solar energy into sugars within plants, which are then eaten by the consumers, etc. And then there are the cultural elements such as tourism. So without nature, we wouldn't be having those services that you see here, which ultimately we rely on as individuals, but also as society. And the World Economic Forum values this as you know, what you can see there, but ultimately it's priceless outcome. Any disruption to the amount of biodiversity or the supply of water will result in a disruption of ecosystems and therefore all of those outputs. So that ultimately will generate species decline. It may see invasive species, disease outbreaks, the fact that crops failing and all that kind of thing. So you can see that by ecosystems and their services are crucial to business and their needs. So what underpins nature? Well, biodiversity underpins nature, and biodiversity is the variety of all living things on Earth. But I think it's important to note that underpinning biodiversity are the individual animals and plants and their species, which all have similar characteristics, and also the individual animals or individual plants that themselves have needs and requirements. So just looking at each of those elements individually, nature supports that healthy society and thriving economy. Biodiversity underpins ecosystems and their essential services, which you saw in that previous slide. And individual animals in particular are recognized as sentient beings and can experience pain, suffering, and distress. So protecting animal welfare in particular is really integral to ensuring biodiversity and healthy, fully functioning nature. So going back to nature, its protection and anything that is likely to cause its destruction or degradation and the loss of biodiversity will ultimately threaten those ecosystems and the services on which we rely. So elements like global warming, pollution, and biodiversity loss, which are recognized as the triple planetary crises, are really integral for any business to understand their contribution to and to try and mitigate that as much as possible. And that's really the basis for what is now called the Biodiversity Plan for Life on Earth. This was established in 2022 and signed up to by 196 governments. It incorporates a number of goals and targets, and those are very much relevant to governments, to businesses, and the whole of society. And ultimately, the goal is to try and halt and reverse biodiversity loss to sustain those ecosystems and their services. Businesses are particularly a focus within the plan, and businesses are required to assess, reduce, and disclose their nature risks. So their contributions to those triple planetary crises. And within travel and tourism, we have named this process nature positive tourism, which ultimately requires or encourages businesses to identify and reduce their impacts and to identify opportunities to restore nature. What that looks like in practice is, yes, it is the sustainable use of natural resources, but that must be seen as the first base requirement. The second need is to reduce your risks or nature risks and impacts, how you're contributing to the triple planetary crisis. And then in order to build back the biodiversity on which we rely and sustain those ecosystems and their services, we need to restore biodiversity, particularly in those locations where the impacts are the greatest. So in relation to tourism, tourism's dependencies should be quite clear to us. The facts, over 80% of tourism's goods and services are heavily reliant on nature, if not 100%. We know that nature-based tourism is on the up. It's currently 50% share of the market, and that's set to increase over time. Nature-based tourism and wildlife tourism generates a lot of income, lots of revenues, and sustains millions of jobs. And it also drives economic growth. So nature and nature and tourism is vital to global economies around the world. If we look at tourism's dependencies on nature, there are many, and these are just some of them. And I think the important message to make is that you're not expected to cover all your dependencies and your risks. Obviously, if nature is being diminished, then those dependencies become risks because you're reliant upon them and their availability is being degraded. You need to focus on those that are material to your business, those that are most important to your business, and include those within your sustainability planning. From a impacts and risks perspective, these are very clear because there are 5 drivers of biodiversity loss: the change of land and sea use, the sustainable or the unsustainable use of natural resources, climate change, pollution, which includes all the different types of pollution, and invasive alien species, or the introduction of non-native species into natural environments. Tourism contributes to all 5 of those impacts on nature, but depending on your business, you will impact on some more than others. So it's really important to identify those you impact on the most and to direct your resources and your efforts to where those greatest impacts are. The key importance is to recognize that your supply chain is likely to be where your risks are the greatest. And if you consider your supply chain or your value chain, however you refer to it, is that it includes all those natural resources from which you source your products through to what you provide to your consumers. This is broken down into the upstream and downstream delivery. And as you can see from the examples below the arrows, it can be the dependencies on nature to produce those raw materials, but equally by removing those raw materials unsustainably, you ultimately have a negative impact on those materials, through to things like the creation of activities that involve animals and whether those compromise animal welfare. So companies are really encouraged to understand their value chains, to identify their impacts and dependencies within them, and to include those elements within their sustainability planning. Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. There's many of you with us today, which is great to see. So Daniel, thank you. So now you've got an understanding of why the protection of nature is so important. I'm going to take you through the how in a little bit more detail, so what steps you can take. I'm going to start with just introducing the Nature Positive Tourism Roadmap. Some of you may well have seen this. Some of you may have had a look at the World Travel and Tourism Council 2022 report, in which we launched the roadmap, and that is available to all of you. In fact, Daniel, if you could just hit the button one more time, I think it might bring up the report on the screen. There we go. Thank you. So yes, if you want to refer to this for more information on this roadmap and the steps that you've got to take after this session, then we would recommend that. But just to briefly explain this in detail. So Daniel's gone through the assess and define stage, the first stage there, really helping you look at how you can scope out your nature-related risks, impacts and dependencies. And of course, this is an assessment that you can do yourselves, and you can refer to the Nature Positive Tourism Guides, or you can have a look at the resources section of our website, and of course the Tourism Cares Nature Positive Tourism module, which I had another look at again to prepare the slides for this, and I was really pleased to see that it really does nail down the steps of this roadmap really well. And of course it would do, but I haven't seen it for a while, so it was nice to just remind myself of what we put in there. So the first step, assess and define, I'm going to take you through that. Thank you, Daniel. So you can use the Nature Impact Assessment tool. This is something that we've developed over the last several years since COVID, and it really pulls in all of the different areas. So it looks at all of the impacts and dependencies, including across the areas of animal welfare, biodiversity, all the 5 drivers that we've just looked at, sustainable consumption and community engagement. It also pulls in all of the criteria of reporting that's out there. There's many guidelines, frameworks, and people aren't often too aware where to start. But if you use this tool, everything is pulled into one. It's a one-stop shop. So it's an online assessment tool where you can go on and input answers to various questions, and it will basically pull out a report and let you know where you sit currently in terms of your impacts and where we would suggest the improvements can be made. So you'll have a bespoke report that's provided to you with that step-by-step action plan after that. If that's too much for you and actually you'd rather look at it yourself, absolutely, as we mentioned, have a look at the Tourism Cares module, and also refer to the Nature Positive Tourism Travel and Tourism Guide that I showed a minute ago. Thank you, Daniel. So these are the steps that you can do to undertake this assessment yourself. Thank you. So first of all, you want to really look at defining your scope. So this is really where you clarify the breadth of work, the stakeholders involved, and the resources needed in order to assess your business, but also consider your timescale and budgets. There is so much you can do, but as Daniel mentioned, really focus in on the biggest impacts. So get a picture of the work needed, but remember that you don't need to tackle everything. This just helps you to understand what the scale is. And then secondly, so identify those biggest impacts on nature. And again, as we mentioned, you can use the tool that I've just shown you, or you can go through the guidance. And then number 3 is to have a look at the current products and tools that you offer. As Daniel mentioned, an huge amount of the supply chain involves touch points with animals and nature. I think in Asia it's about 95%. So it's really important to have a look at that from an animal welfare and nature protection perspective, to identify and work out ways to better manage the higher risk activities. And we can help you with this. We worked with John on this many years ago, and you'd be surprised at what can be uncovered. We've identified direct issues within known animal products, such as animal welfare concerns or customer safety concerns, but also in products that you wouldn't even realize at first glance had any connection to animals and nature. So for example, there might be an accommodation provider that you use that may also keep animals inside its premises, but completely unbeknownst to you. So it's really important perhaps to get that second opinion externally if you go through that process. And then we have set product selection guidelines. So once you've got an idea of what products that you're selling and really where those high risk areas are, it's important to set a new goal, a new framework for your product purchasing team. Or if you don't have a team and it's just you, it's very helpful to set this now so that you've got that criteria you can work on going forwards, especially if your team grows over time. So again, this is one of the popular services that we can offer, and it's no problem to just have a call with us anytime if you just want to chat it through. So feel free to get in touch. And then finally, another action that you can take to really define your stance on animal and nature protection bespoke to your business is to create or update a policy and implementation plan to pull all of this together. So you may not actually have a policy in place already, or you may not have anything there, or you may have something. Again, we can look at that for you and improve it and bring it up to date. But it's also important that you make sure you've got that plan attached to your policy, because there really is no point just having a commitment and no actions to take you through it. So it's important really to look at including things such as how you will look at product within that action plan as well, and looking at how you can communicate to customers. So it's really making sure it's not just a statement, a blanket statement, but it's backed up by action. Thank you, Daniel. So then, having identified the issues that need to be addressed and the indicators of effectiveness, then you can really decide what actions you would take to reduce your impacts on biodiversity. And these can range from reducing pesticides to reviewing your single-use plastics, conserving water, reducing waste. There's much you can look at, as Daniel's mentioned. So where to start? The mitigation hierarchy is something you can look at to prioritize your actions. This may not mean an awful lot to you in the room, but it's basically the most established process for deciding the appropriate response to an impact area you've identified. So it's a widely used tool, and it provides guidance on minimizing risk to biodiversity, and it really emphasizes best practice. It's a hierarchy, and it's an ordered list of approaches, with the first being the priority or the first approach. So it pulls out, really, it helps you define what are those highest risks and what we're going to do with those. So it might be there's certain products that you decide, okay, perhaps we shouldn't sell that, or we need to tweak it or work with our suppliers to improve. We would always suggest the latter rather than just stop selling. Or it may be that there's, an action you can take to restore. So it means you don't have to necessarily remove a product, but it's just, adapting it so it's a bit better, and then proactively looking at what you can do to restore nature in that part of the world, perhaps. You can find more information on this on page 40 of the Nature Positive Tourism report, and it's also within the Tourism Cares module on page 11. And then we're looking at building a picture of biodiversity in your main destinations. Again, as Daniel mentioned, it's really important to focus on where your key impacts are. And it's important to understand what those big dependencies and impacts and opportunities are in those destinations. So do use local knowledge, speak to local partners, speak to each other. It's a huge benefit to be part of a group such as Tourism Cares, where you'll have, many of you within a certain destination. So it's always good to share information. And then look at reviewing your suppliers against the animal welfare and nature positive good practice standards. Again, the reports will take you through that. And who can support with this? We can support. We also work with Preveris Group, who are an auditing company, and they can support with the in-destination auditing. Again, for those of you that, are small bodies, you don't have the money or the capacity or the time, I understand that, to go auditing all of your animal or nature-related experiences. But by just identifying those that are high risk to begin with, there can be some desk-based research. Again, we can provide guidance, or the Tourism Cares module takes you through how you can do that yourself. Or you can look at, working with an external such as Preveris Group to go in destination if you feel there's something you really need to check out in person. And when we talk about engaging suppliers, it's really important that you introduce them to your new goals. So if you set your commitment that we've just mentioned, your policy, your implementation plan, then it's about introducing that to them. So consider the rest of the value chain that Daniel has introduced earlier, and where you can really look at sourcing more sustainable products. Thank you, Daniel. On to the next. Okay, so this is an example of a travel business. So it's a travel agency that we've worked with, and they're a bit unusual because they actually have a group of over 2,000 travel counselors who are individuals around the world who are part of their network selling experiences. So it's an awful lot. It's a big network to try and control. And travel counsellors wanted to work with us because they were facing scrutiny over their animal activities, something that I'm sure many of you in the room would understand or have experienced. And they wanted to make sure there was a consistent approach. So we worked with them to conduct a risk activities assessment, and that really defined their red lines as to what products they would then sell and not sell. We then helped them to create product selection criteria and sales team guidance. And we developed an animal protection policy and implementation plan. And then Daniel has delivered a series of workshops to really bring that to life and provide training on the animal welfare assessment that was done to demonstrate the risks that the business, can touch on and how to manage them. Thank you, Daniel. Next one. So we're now going to look at the next stage of the roadmap, which is restoring. So once you've identified your risks and impacts and dependencies, the nature positive tourism module then requires us to take a proactive approach and actually take steps to restore nature in our key destinations. And as this slide suggests, our sector really does have a unique ability to do just that. And in fact, we're already taking many positive actions as it stands. So yeah, thank you, Daniel. If you just sort of pull those up. So of course, we have the benefit of being in all different places around the world, and we have those touch points in nature. So it's really important that we take our role quite seriously. But what can we do? So let's have a look at the type of actions that we as travel businesses can take to restore nature that we depend on the most. If you wouldn't mind moving forward, Daniel. So looking at restore, what are the key actions that you can take? So first of all, identify positive product opportunities to enhance nature and protect animals whilst enhancing your own portfolio as well. As we know, travellers are increasingly drawn to more ethical and environmentally friendly experiences that really bring us closer to nature, but in as responsible a way as possible. So once you've assessed your product portfolio, perhaps you could consider what new positive product opportunities could be added into it. And then we're looking at number 2, invest in your key destinations. So these ones are really, as we've mentioned again, the main ones for you. So the areas of the world in which you have the greatest footfall, those that are particularly biodiverse or where operations are particularly reliant on natural resources or have a big impact on them. So within that, identify local or national conservation priorities. There's something called national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And I mean, I hadn't heard of these. It may well be news to all of you. But actually they can be found on the CBD website and are strategic policy documents developed by destinations, which aims at providing direction at a national level on the management and protection of biodiversity. So if, for example, Peru is a key destination for you, you could search for the relevant action plan on that website for Peru and identify your key nature-related plans for that country, and then you can tailor the actions that you take as a business to support those. And again, it could just be 1 or 2 things. We understand you can't do everything. And then the next step, number 3, is working with local people. And this is very important because they understand the local nature. They really are the guardians. So supporting Indigenous people's rights can also be a very highly effective way to protect biodiversity, as of course they have that extensive understanding of the nature around them and how to ensure its health and resilience. Again, we can't do everything on our own. It's why it's so important to build these partnerships. And you can look at finding local restoration partners and NGOs in destinations. And of course, as has been mentioned earlier on, John introduced the Meaningful Travel Map, which is a fantastic resource to use. We also have our animal protection network at ANIMONDIAL, and we work with John and the team to make sure that there are experiences within the Meaningful Travel Map that involve animal and nature protection. So we're really aligned on that. So it's a great opportunity to go in there and really find who you can collaborate with on nature protection projects. And these partners can help you with monitoring activities as well and provide customer experiences that you can include within your product portfolio. And we're going to introduce a few of these key impact partners listed on the Meaningful Travel Map in just a couple of minutes. And then I think, thank you, Daniel, collaborating with others. I mean, I've already mentioned this, but I just wanted to sort of hammer home that point that work with others within this network. We have a number of partners at ANIMONDIAL because we're a tiny team. We can't do everything ourselves. But as long as we've got someone who we can bring in that can offer that support, then, we can tick more boxes. So perhaps you could work with, another travel business that has a similar destination or, a similar focus to you. Could it be a tourism board that you work with? Could you even look at a small scale restoration project that you all collaborate with together? So there's a small amount perhaps that you will put in each, and it makes a real difference to you and your customers. And finally, use your influence. Even if you can't do any of, many of the things listed today, what you can do is raise awareness of these issues. And, you've got an audience in front of you. Individuals are travellers, travel business individuals are travellers themselves. So it's just important that we keep banging the drum. Thank you, Daniel. And I think we're now going to hand over actually to one of our, well, there's going to be two organizations that we're going to introduce. So we've got, first of all, Skyline Hawaii, I believe, if Joe's available. And then after that, we'll introduce Skyline Conservation, sorry, Coral Restoration Foundation, and that'll be with Katie. So over to you, first of all, Joe.
Aloha. Good. Hello, everybody. I'd have to say I'm really humbled to be able to speak to people from all over the world on the Zoom call. So thank you for having me. I am the manager of the Skyline Hawaii Haleakala Zipline Tour, and we are the first zipline operator in the United States. It was set up in 2002 by Danny Boren and his father, Buck Boren. And yeah, it was kind of wild. The first zip line in the US was in 2002. At the very beginning, we wanted to do ecotourism. And after listening to this amazing information on this webinar right now, I realized we've had a nature positive philosophy since the very beginning. And one way that we did it, right away, we signed up with a program called 1% for the Planet, which was set up by Yvonne Chenard of Patagonia. And they basically audit our books at the end of the year and make sure that we give at least 1% of gross revenues to conservation programs of our choice that are part of their, that have been audited by their program as well. And then more recently, we've become certified through B Corp. And now we can proudly wear those logos on our shirt and put them on all of our marketing materials. And that's just one way that we can guarantee by being parts of these programs that we are affecting positive change in our local communities and also our local ecosystems. Next slide, please. So we started doing native habitat restoration at our facility, and you can see these beautiful red lehua flowers from the ohia tree. There's all this ecology that makes the Hawaiian Islands really, really special. And the slopes of Haleakala volcano in which we operate used to be covered in a really lush forest of ohia and koa trees and sandalwood trees. It's a really, really special environment. Over the last 150 years, unfortunately, a lot of these ecosystems have been badly degraded over time. Next slide, please. And this is the ecosystem that we currently have. This forest that you can see in this photograph is eucalyptus from Australia, and it was transplanted to Maui at the turn of the century, like in the 1900s. And this is what dominates the landscape in our particular location. Back in 2002, when we started the zipline operation at the site, these trees were alive and beautiful and lush and really green, and it smelled amazing, almost like if you were to hike through the outback of Australia. But it's not a Hawaiian forest. And since then, the forest has been dying. You can see the trees are all kind of silver, and there's beetles and weevils eating all the leaves, and they're dying out rapidly, which is kind of concerning. And now this poses a major fire hazard for the slopes of Maui. And we've recently experienced really horrific wildfires in the town of Lahaina. We had a massive fire that devastated our entire community there, but also on the slopes of Haleakala and Kula Maui. We've had major fires come within like a half a mile of our zip line and our restoration site. So what we've done is, after a while, we're planting amazing trees, and we're doing a lot of work outside of the scope of tourism and running zip lines. So we started we got a 501c3 partnership, and we started raising funds to do landscape scale ecological restoration. That's kind of on the side in addition to our commercial tour operations. Next slide, please. This is why we do it. This map, everything in pink, shows the ecological deforestation that's happened, and all the content that Daniel and Helen provided, like, is really it's so important, this information that they're sharing. Here in Maui, Hawaii, we're kind of the extinction epicenter of the United States. Although it's a very beautiful place for people to come and visit, and there's lots of tropical plants, a lot of those are exotics. But when scientists come and visit, their hearts are breaking because of the biodiversity loss. And everything in pink is non-native. We've lost more than 75% of our ecosystems. And everything in green is basically two mountaintops. We have Mauna Kahalavai to the west and Haleakala to the east. And a lot of these ecosystems are really fragile, and they're protected, and they're not accessible to the majority of people, visitors and residents alike. So that's why businesses have a responsibility to try to promote biodiversity restoration and ecological restoration. And that's really the foundation. When I saw this map years ago, it made me want to cry, because it's like we lost a lot. One thing as well that we've done during COVID, we had to lay off everybody. Maui is completely tourism dependent, and we had the highest unemployment rates in the nation. And we had to lay everybody off almost island wide in the tourism industry for an entire year. So our company kind of pivoted, and we started a conservation training program, and we got all of our staff who were interested off of unemployment, and we trained them in ecological restoration practices. And now, in addition to running zipline tours, 100% of our Haleakala zipline staff are conservationists. And in places like Maui, where we're so tourism dependent, it's a roller coaster of ebb and flow of tourism seasons. And because of COVID, and now because of these horrible wildfires, our tourism industry has been really badly impacted by it. And our slow seasons are really, really slow, and lots of people are laid off on a yearly basis during those slow seasons. But by doing conservation field work, our staff is able to maintain full-time employment year-round, and it leads to resiliency within at least our particular company. And we're able to help restore some of the most fragile and degraded ecosystems left in the world, because Maui has the most endemicism out of any other ecosystem in the United States. Next slide, please. So this is kind of boots on the ground of what we're doing at our facility. When we started the Haleakala Zipline Tour, we only had one indigenous Hawaiian tree in our 46-acre facility. Since then, we've removed invasive fire fuel prone flammable plants, and we've been replacing the landscape with indigenous Hawaiian plants. 38 different species that are appropriate for our area. We've planted over 27,000 native plants at the site. And this tree, this koa tree in the photograph, this is our 20,000th native plant that we put in the ground. We've had 17,000 volunteers, probably about 75% local residents and 25% visitors have participated in our ecological restoration. So it's really, really important of what we can do to restore our local environmental conditions. Next slide, please. This is just a before and after photograph. You can see the trees in the background was once the lush eucalyptus, and now they're dying back, and we're clear cutting them. The trees in the foreground, we planted native koa trees and ali'i plants, and in a short amount of time, they're exploding with life. We've basically erased these ecosystems over the last 200 years, and once you re-release them, they explode they're amazing, and the proof is in the pudding. Next slide, please. And these are the indicators of the success. The elementals are telling us that we're doing a good job when biodiversity returns. The bird on the left is a EEV bird, and they're a threatened species, and they weren't in our area, but now you can see them. People on our tours can see them. And then the photograph on the right is an ephemeral natural spring. that popped up out of the ground on its own in 2022. And that's because of our ecological restoration. By removing the thirsty eucalyptus trees and planting natives, the aquifer in the watershed is a lot more healthy. And this is just an indicator to that. So we feel like it's our responsibility to give back as a business. And, we want to set the bar as high as possible for what we can do as an eco tour, and not just have, smoke and mirrors and put that on our name, but like quantifiable, measurable results. And this is what happens because of it. So thank you very much. Aloha.
Thank you very much for that, Joe. Incredible. And over to Katie Hall now from the Coral Restoration Foundation.
Hi there, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Katie Hall, and I am the Education Field Associate at the Coral Restoration Foundation, which means I coordinate all of our in-water programming. So the Coral Restoration Foundation, also known as CRF, is one of the world's largest nonprofits marine conservation organizations dedicated to restoring coral reefs to a healthy state in the Florida Keys and globally. We are actively restoring coral reefs on a massive scale, educating others on the importance of our ocean and using science to further coral research and coral reef monitoring techniques. We work to support the coral reef's natural recovery process through large-scale cultivation, outplanting, and monitoring of genetically diverse reef-building corals. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our work goes beyond growing tens of thousands of corals in our offshore coral nurseries across the Florida Keys. It's about more than just returning thousands of corals to our local reefs. It's about inspiring, motivating, and mobilizing thousands of people to join us in our restoration efforts and raise awareness about the importance of oceans and coral reefs. And then in this photo is a screenshot of our Tavernier nursery. And in that nursery, there's over 500 of those coral trees. Next slide, please. So we offer both dive and snorkel experiences, giving participants the chance to actively engage in coral restoration. These programs are also accompanied by a variety of virtual and in-person educational programs throughout the year. In doing so, we empower people to speak about coral reef restoration and how important coral reefs are to our healthy oceans and a healthy planet. Our in-water programs come in two different forms, our public and private. Our public programs are ideal for individuals or smaller groups and follow a pre-established schedule throughout the year and is listed on our website in advance. And then our private programs are tailored for larger groups such as dive clubs, schools, and corporate teams, offering a more personalized experience with flexible scheduling and content. What sets our programs apart is our collaboration with local businesses. We work closely with our local boat operators, helping support small businesses throughout the Florida Keys, while also contributing to both our local economy and coral restoration efforts. Next slide, please. So our programs have seen years of success and continue to grow, breaking down barriers and ensuring these opportunities are accessible for everyone. We partnered with the Boy Scouts of America, and each summer over 200 scouts are actively participating in outplanting hundreds of corals every year, inspiring the next generation of ocean stewards. We've also modified and customized our programs to accommodate adaptive divers, making sure that all individuals can experience the unique work we do. This is an opportunity that very few people get to experience, and we're very thankful for the work that we do. Next slide. And then what makes these programs so special is it's a chance for travelers to make a real difference. Rather than just observing coral reefs, you're actively participating in restoration and creating a more impactful experience. This hands-on involvement deepens their connection to the coral environment and strengthens their commitment to ocean conservation. By blending education, conservation, and travel, these programs offer tourists a unique way to appreciate and protect coral reefs. This approach is not only benefiting the environment, but also supports the local community, promoting sustainable tourism for the future. And I'd like to say thank you all so much for allowing me to talk. And I hope this inspires you for incorporating ecotourism into your work. My email is going to be katie@coralrestoration.org, and I'd love to hear from you all and if you have any questions. And feel free to check out our socials and our website.
Thank you so much to Katie and to Joe. I think you can all see why we're thrilled to have folks like this on our webinars to really hear the voices from the community about what's important to them and how our industry can support the health of local communities, local ecosystems, all those things. It was really a struggle for us even to choose who to invite to speak today. So I do have a couple slides here just sharing 4 more organizations to give you an idea of the geographic diversity and the diversity of experiences that you can have and still do nature positive travel and tourism. So on the left here, we've got Ibu Bumi Orangutan in North Sumatra, Indonesia, which is dedicated to rainforest conservation and is building wildlife corridors for endangered species like orangutans, gibbons, tigers, to be able to get, from place to place, but then they're promoting opportunities for ecotourism as well. And then on the right, we've got the Dunregan Rewilding Center, which is in Scotland. Again, totally different type of geographic area, but really important work going on there as well. It's a rewilding project that is helping to restore Scotland's Caledonian forest and then provides immersive walks and experiences in nature with conservation and even folding in Gaelic heritage as well. Next slide, please. On the left of this slide, you'll see Coquira Soil Project, which was part of our Meaningful Travel Summit in Panama last year in 2024. It's a regenerative farm that used to be a standard industrial agricultural farm that has now switched over to all these sustainability practices, emphasizing biodiversity, soil health, food sovereignty, and they give tours. They have a beautiful place to stay overnight in a really relaxing environment. And then on the right, we've got Haida Style Expeditions, which is based in Haida Gwaii in Canada. This is the only Haida owned and operated tourism business that offers marine expeditions into Gwaii Hana National Park Reserve. They integrate indigenous knowledge, conservation, cultural preservation practices, while emphasizing with their guests the protection of land and water. So that's just again, a selection of some of the organizations that you can find on the Meaningful Travel map. And as I made this comment in the chat, we're trying to cover the whole globe with the map. We're not there yet. And so really one of the takeaways from this is like using these examples as a way to go and find other organizations that are like these in the destinations that you're selling, you're building, et cetera, et cetera. So, take these lessons as a way to build product, not just to go find something that's already determined for you on the Meaningful Travel map. Back over to you, Helen.
Thanks so much, John. And thank you also, Joe and Katie. Incredible work. Some really great examples of restoration projects that you can work with to regenerate nature, as you say, including your product portfolios. And actually, it leads me nicely onto the next step of the roadmap. So we're on to monitoring and reporting now as one of the stages of the nature positive tourism roadmap and actions that travel businesses need to take. And working with partners in destinations is actually a very key way that you can be enabled to collect data that helps you to report back in a very accurate manner. So I think that's a nice connection there. But I'm going to take you through briefly why this is so important now. Regulations are growing around the world. So as Daniel mentioned, we have the biodiversity plan after COP15. And following that now, there are many growing reporting requirements around the world. Thank you, Daniel. Although these are heavily EU focused, I wanted to bring them in briefly to this presentation. Oh, sorry, Daniel. Back. That's it. Too many bullets. Into this presentation today because they do still impact on you. It's really very much focused on supply chain. So if you are actually selling product or experiences to EU travel businesses or to EU customers, then this really does mean something to you. So this is really about the transformation of ESG reporting. It's accelerated over the last several years as regions, countries and jurisdictions have enacted disclosure regulations as a result of the biodiversity plan. So these ones here that I want to mention are CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This requires companies to integrate biodiversity and climate action into reporting, but currently it is just focused on large businesses, and they are looking at delivering their first reports now. And it's also going to be applicable to publicly listed SMEs, but not until 2027. We've got CSDDD. This expands the obligations to due diligence across the supply chains, and it's phasing in from 2026 to 2029. And this came about as a result of realizing the challenges of managing impacts in the supply chain, where over 90% of impacts take place. Suppliers now need to provide transparent data about your impact and vice versa. So due to your size, as many of you on this call, and the fact that you're not necessarily based in the EU, you won't yet meet the criteria for mandatory reporting under these directives, but it's very important to be aware of them. And in addition, these such regulations are soon to appear in other nations, so we do have some coming up across the globe. So it's best to act now and to see how you can start to comply, or at least follow some frameworks. And it's really because it's the right thing to do for nature, not just to get you sort of prepared. And of course, we've got to listen to what the public want. So 75% of people want to make their holiday travel sustainable. So, it's about that as well. It's very important to make sure that we're listening to our customers. Thank you, Daniel. So to put it in very simple terms, so you can just go, okay, does that apply to me or not currently? It may not be that simple. So directly, you can see here how it does apply, but then the underlined areas that I wanted to highlight are if you sell to EU customers, as I've mentioned, or indirectly if you're a supplier to an EU company that might be selling your products. So it's very, very important that if you do supply to an EU company, that they have the assurance that your products meet their best practice standards for animal and nature protection, as they will have to report on this as part of their mandatory disclosure. But even if none of this applies, why start with it now? Well, there's many benefits. So of course, you can see some on the right, but to be seen as a trusted compliant supplier to the overseas is perhaps the most critical one there. It's through complying and setting out your own internal processes aligned with the expectations of these businesses, you'll be deemed as more trusted to others. And of course, we've got on there, oh, sorry, Daniel, one more. Is there one more button there? That's it. Attracting responsible investors as well, which is really key, as I think, for smaller businesses. If you're looking to grow and you need that money, there is really now that focus on making sure that people are investing in companies that they believe are doing the right thing. Thank you, Daniel. Next slide, please. So how can you tackle this? And please don't feel overwhelmed by this today. A lot of larger companies haven't even started looking into this, but will have to. So don't feel like you're behind. You're not at all. This is quite new to many of us here. But it really does follow that whole acronym of SMART. I'm sure a lot of you know of that. Oh gosh, how have I actually forgot what I'm saying on this call? But making it specific, there we go, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time framed. So it is still very much focused on making sure that you set goals for your business that are focused around that. We've got the ESG and LEAP criteria outlined here, and on the left you'll see what LEAP is, and that's connected to TNFD, Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosure. They have created this reporting framework to help businesses to report back on their impacts on nature specifically. So we think it's good to do a combination of ESG for your reporting, but bringing in the LEAP criteria, because that will really help you focus on the environmental side of things. So what you're doing in terms of the impacts on nature, you can use this framework within that part of your ESG. So it'll help you to really look at where, so locating where those big impacts are for your business. We've gone through that a lot today in the session. Evaluating, so these are the different stages of it. So really looking at what those dependencies and impacts are, assessing, and that's focused on identifying those high impact ones. So you can look at the mitigation hierarchy, and then preparing for disclosure. So in your annual reports, if you do them or you don't do them, we have a small one ourselves just to make sure that we are, holding ourselves to account. But it's really just making sure that you have something that you can provide any investors, or internally you can report to going forwards. And then that leads on to the next bullet, so integrating it within the business. So Embed the monitoring in your existing processes and schedules, so it's not another huge job on top of everything else that you're doing. So for example, at ANIMONDIAL, I'm supporting Daniel with the client work, but I'm also undertaking running the business, including the finances. So there's a lot to do. So I get it. I get how there's very little time to even think about this. But I include my reporting, for example, on travel impacts and travel expenses and CO2 and all of that at the same time as running expenses to reimburse the cost for travel. So I can look at killing those two birds in one stone, for want of a better term. But if you're a bigger business, obviously involve all departments, suppliers and partners. And if you work with people on the ground, get them involved to helping with the monitoring and reporting as well. Collaborate, work with others. So as I've just mentioned, look at those in destination partners to support you. Look at your restoration partners in destination. They can help you to look at the impacts of working with them, and they know the nature in those locations. So that's a really good benefit, I think, of partnering with these incredible projects that we've listened to and heard from today. And report transparently. So it's very important to put your hands up. If you haven't got something right one year, that's fine. It's better that you're just honest and say, this is our goal, this is what these were our goals this year, this is how we fared, but next year, therefore, we're going to improve on this by doing X, Y, Z. You don't have to be perfect, it is a process. And track that progress as you go. So take baselines at the beginning. So if you are wanting to, measure any impacts in a destination, make sure you've got that starting baseline so you can obviously see how your impacts have improved things over time, and use intensity ratios and benchmarking. So just to briefly outline what they are, intensity ratios are saying, what is your water consumption per person per night, for example. So be a bit more specific about it and start small. Thank you, Daniel. Anything more there? Yeah. And stay informed on the legal obligations that may impact your business, as we've mentioned. Now, I'm going to very briefly just go over communications and greenwashing. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us. I realise we're on the dot of the hour. I wanted to mention this because there is growing focus on green claims currently, and I'm sure a lot of you will know what they are. You can just see some examples of terminology there on the screen, and there are fines being issued around the world now, so we really do have to pay attention to it. We've also included there a note of the fines in the US, Australia and Canada. But in the UK, we now have this Low Welfare Activities Abroad Act, which prohibits businesses from promoting activities abroad that involve low welfare treatment of animals. So if you're working with a UK travel business, now it's really important that you make sure that any products involving animals in nature are verified as being trusted. So thank you, Daniel. So what is the EU Green Claims Directive? Again, it's another EU directive, but it has impacts on businesses outside of the EU. So again, if you're working with an EU client, you need to be aware of this. And I think I just need to unpack slightly the final bullet point there. So includes requirements for evidence, full disclosure. So scientific evidence, it has to be backed up by science. Full disclosure is about making sure that you include all relevant details about what the claim actually is, not just selecting the top highlights that you want, that you're happy to promote. And looking at reference values, so again, it's that, being specific. So if you've reduced CO2 emissions by 20%, by doing what? How have you done that? And looking at the life cycle of a product as well. So not just the production of an experience, from the ground upwards, but it's also looking at, after that trip that the customer's been on, then what are you doing, following that to ensure that, you're ticking those boxes. And just one quick example on the right here. So we've got this example by Wizz Air very recently. This advert got them in trouble because they described themselves as one of the greenest choices in air travel. It was banned because it was deemed misleading, mainly because they failed to show comparisons in the verifiable data to justify their claim. Thank you, Daniel. So some key actions to take home for communications and to avoid all of this. We do recommend creating an internal key messaging guide. That is really just something that you can refer to internally. It can just be it could even be a 2-pager document that you just, have internally for your colleagues. And this is where you can include your policy, your animal or nature protection policy, any customer Q&As, PR inquiries, use of imagery as well. You'd be surprised at, you may have stopped selling elephant riding, but perhaps there's an old image that's still there on your website. So it's important to make sure that you cover all of those bases. you can look at informing your colleagues and partners, suppliers, look at lunch and learns, for example, looking at your current contracts with suppliers, add in a mention of your new policy. The next point is about introducing your commitments within your annual comms planners. So, if you've got those available, you don't have to do anything else. It's just plugging in that new commitment, on appropriate dates of the year where you can talk about what you're doing. And then some key points here to address the greenwashing risk. Thank you, Daniel. I think we can move forward. Thank you. So I think this is the key take homes really. And I don't know, Daniel, if you wanted to come back in just to finish this up today before we pass back and over to Q&A.
Sure, I'm happy to. So just kind of recap as far as the key actions to take. And I appreciate there was a lot of information in there for you to understand and absorb and see how it relates to your business. But this slide kind of gives you, let's say, the checklist of actions that you need to consider taking in order to meet these nature positive requirements that are just increasingly required for travel businesses. So you need to scope out your direct operations, so what your direct business requires, and that may be an office, or it may be, it's basically what your products ultimately, what you need for your products that you're selling, but also to look at your upward and downward value chains. So what are those products? What are you sourcing from the wild in order to create those products? It may be wood, it may be food, it may be water. And then what are you requiring in the downward value chain? And one of the slides earlier dissected the value chain for you. So within that value chain, you need to think about your dependencies. What are you reliant upon in relation to nature and their ecosystem services? And which ones of those are most important to your business? And then from impacts, which of your direct and indirect activities are impacting the most on nature? Then within that, from an animal and nature risk perspective, particularly the use of animals in excursions and other activities, what are your highest risks? As in, which of those activities are having the greatest impact on nature and or animals? And that's ultimately where you have to focus as far as how to improve your activities. As Helen mentioned, it is really important that once you've assessed your dependencies and impacts, just to understand your locations in which you operate, which areas are highly biodiverse, which areas have high levels of degradation, such as that Joe was talking about with the eucalyptus. It's really important to have an understanding of the nature in your surroundings, which would then help you to assess the risk going forward. So identifying your material risks, and then that will help you develop your reduction plan, what actions you are taking to reduce your dependencies and to reduce your impact on nature. And then that will then dictate what your business commitments are and your priorities going forward. Ensure that this is communicated and adopted by your partners and suppliers, because as you've heard, most of the impact and dependency is in your value chain, not in your direct operations. So that's where action needs to take place. And then lastly, accurate reporting requires that sort of very strict process of reducing risk and restoring nature. All this information is readily available in the Tourism Cares Nature Positive Tourism module, but also the Nature Positive Tourism reports and on the ANIMONDIAL website. So there's lots of information out there to help you dissect all of this information and to understand what to implement first and how to implement it. John.
Let's just skip ahead to the next slide, Daniel, because I think people know what resources that are out there. So we'll just leave up on this slide here all of the contact information you might need. And in a moment, we're just going to switch to the Q&A. So we welcome you to stay on for a few minutes until we've resolved all the questions there in the Q&A, including a couple to Katie and Joe. So I encourage you folks to stay on, be ready to hop back on video. But I just want to thank everybody for being here first before we head over to the Q&A. And thank you so much to Helen, to Daniel, Katie, Joe for presenting all this incredible content and making it really clear to our audience that they can start taking small steps today towards protecting all these things that we rely on for the health and benefit of our industry for future generations. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to the speakers, and I'll hand it back to Helen and Daniel to work through the Q&A there.
Sure. I think the first one is for me, so that's handy. Yolanda, thank you. Is there a cost for using the nature impact assessment tool? There is a cost because we are a small team, and it takes a lot of our time to go through it, but we have actually tailored it depending on the size of the company. We wanted to make sure that it was affordable for smaller businesses as well. So there is like a light version of the tool in development now for companies that perhaps have the smaller budgets. But we're very happy to also offer a discount to Tourism Cares members. So perhaps, John, we can follow up with you on that. Very happy to offer a discount to your members for our services and the tool. But yes, so Yolanda, just drop me a line if you want. Just drop me an email, and then I can give you more information. And then I think we've got some questions for a question for Joe, if Joe is still with us. Hi, Joe. We've got a question. I'm curious who the major funders of your work are.
So the major funder originally has been Skyline Hawaii since 2002. We have been, with 1% for the Planet, we've been donating to all kinds of local programs. But in addition to that, we've started one of our own. In 2017 is when we realized that we were more than just a business planting trees, but we were actually creating an ecological movement that's shifting the whole ecosystem and bringing in endangered species and stuff like that. So that's when we got our fiscal partner, 501c3 Nākoa Manu Conservation, and we kind of had the delineation between our commercial operations and our charitable program. Then I became a self-taught grant writer, and we're able to leverage and match the resources that Skyline has been putting into it all along, and using those as matching funds for federal, state, and county and private funds and grants. And since then, we've brought in a total of about $750,000 in donations and grant funds and contracts to expand the capacity of our restoration efforts. And now it's kind of being modeled as best practices for this particular kind of a habitat in post-wildfire recovery efforts, because we have, unfortunately, in our environment, these horrible wildfires that have happened like multiple times in the last couple of years. And we're now recognized as the best way to restore these degraded landscapes through our experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina has a question for Katie. So back to Katie, if you're with us still. So the question is, during the program during Tourism Cares program, I think on Maui, we learnt that the Maui Ocean Centre is working on a similar project with coral reefs, and they're actually selecting for corals that are handling bleaching well. Have you found that certain species thrive in man-made structures in the waters off of Florida?
So how our nursery is set up is that we have pretty much a bank of genotypes that have historically been found within the Florida Keys. So we are not necessarily picking and choosing. We just have this parent genetic bank where we can then grow our corals. There is a process called fragging, where you're able to break off the corals and they can grow independently and also grow together and fuse within one another. So that's essentially how we do our work. But as you realize, it's not just us in the Florida Keys, it's also globally. There's different nonprofits and different initiatives that are doing coral restoration efforts.
Brilliant, thank you. And Daniel, I see you've already answered this one. Pamela, are there a list of actions on the Tourism Cares website anywhere? Yeah, there is also, so on our website, absolutely. There's also the Tourism Cares module that we developed. Yeah, perfect. And that really takes you through like a step-by-step process. So it breaks down what we went through today, the roadmap that I went through today, but just builds it into a bit more of a picture. So I would very much recommend having a look at that. I think that's it. I don't know if we've got any more questions. Thank you for your lovely comments in the other chat, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been incredible to have such a huge number of you with us today. Sure. All right.
Okay. Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.